Hi everybody, welcome along to episode 24 of Percussion Discussion. I hope you're enjoying all the interviews that we're doing for you, and I've got a little favour to ask. If you could please subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is North Wales Drum Promotions, I would be eternally grateful. This way you won't miss any of the interviews that we've done in the past or that we have coming up forward. We've got some great ones coming up as well. Now a little bit about today's guest, an incredible drummer originally from South Carolina, who now lives in Nashville. He's been the Country Music Awards Drummer of the Year, I think, for 7 years now. He's got an incredible recording career of over 400 albums, so diverse. He's basically been brought up in studios. He's a great producer, and for the last 5 years he has occupied Toto's drum stool. So let's get on with it without further ado. I'd like to welcome Mr. Shannon Forrest.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Been looking forward to doing this with you.
Oh, honestly, I have as well. It's always a pleasure to speak to great drummers, and
Yeah.
you're one of them, trust me. So obviously it's a bit of a strange time for everybody at the moment. No gigs happening, but I know you've got a prolific recording career behind you, and I know you're about the same age as me. You've done a little bit more than me. How's things at the moment? Are you managing to keep busy?
It's very, it's different, I mean, thankfully I've been able to keep busy enough, but certainly, there's no avenue of the music industry that's not untouched by, all the COVID implications. And, but, just because of the nature of gatherings, it's had maybe a slightly disproportionate impact on entertainment, And as a result, it's slowed down recording, although here in Nashville, it kind of picks up some and then drops back off. But I really, just for anybody out there listening, and checking this out, I took a different course with my career about 10 years ago. I don't do very many. I do as few of those kind of sessions as I can, just because the nature of what it is and how they do it and what's going on just kind of lost it for me. So I try to, I scratch together enough things here out of my studio, and I can, luckily, thankfully, I'm still making, getting by here,
Absolutely. Well, that's good to hear. Now,
yeah.
I'd like to go back kind of to where it all started for you. Where did the love for drumming come from? Was that the first thing you got into?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of folks that can relate to this, but I was very lucky. My dad's a very talented musician, and I was born in South Carolina in a very small town called Easley. And my dad traveled in gospel quartet music, right? This is the late 60s, right? And there was a little studio in the town, the bigger city, Greenville, South Carolina. He got to know the guys there through, it was really this network of these gospel quartets recorded through this particular studio there. And it was actually a nice facility. And so he through working there in engineering and being a staff arranger for them, and he's an amazing, beautiful string, orchestration arranger, just brilliant. I'm so lucky to grow up under his wing, and he branched off from there and built his own studio in this, kind of area, just sort of off the grid, really, but managed to make that work. And he allowed me to tag along from the time I was 6 months old, man. He was, I grew up like I slept underneath the console. I'd go to work with him. I would lock around his leg, when he'd be going to work before, I'd started kindergarten, things like this. I would, when he'd be going to work, I just wouldn't let go. And he'd finally, give in and take me to work with him. And I just, it's funny because I think about it with my own kids and all these changes, because there's so many other things to grab people's attention these days, young people's attention, and to say hyper focused on one thing like music and even more specifically, even one instrument, because you see all these people that play every instrument in the room now, you know what I mean? It's like video game. And I'm not, disparaging that. It's just a different age of, consuming, information. But it was really a very lucky kind of, trajectory and early development. There was a guy that lived in this little town, a guy named Buster Phillips, and nobody's going to be able to find much about this guy, but he did move over to Nashville in the late 70s and was really taking over, like making a lot of records. But he struggled with some personal issues, and it kind of, derailed a bit of his career. But this guy, man, and I have some recordings. It was like he was very elite level musician. I mean, I remember that his favorite drummer was Steve Gadd, like whose wasn't, you know what I mean? But this is where, so you hear this context of gospel music and what it was that my point of entry, a point of exposure was, but through that, just session musicians, I sat in the back of the drum booth, man. I was like 3-4 years old. And this was like in the days where a drum booth was literally just big enough to get a set of drums into it, and they would give me an extra set of headphones, and I would sit in the back corner, and listen to this guy play. And I don't know, man, to some extent, every little kid likes a drum set, right? I mean, you've never seen a toddler that doesn't pick it up and start banging on it. You know what I mean? But I wonder all these years later, but, we can get into this about what my, interest in the instrument is and how I feel about it or what it means to me. And it means something different to everyone, but I was just drawn to like I remember being a kid and just this resounding word constantly in my mind when I was thinking about music, and I got to be in the room with these adult session musicians that were talking about music and feel, F-E-E-L, not F-I-L-L, you know what I mean? Which is completely the antithesis of where, my love grew from, that was just what it was. And it didn't matter what form of music it was, it's like, I have things that I like better than others, but really, if the feel is there, I'm in, Yeah. And so that, being exposed to that, there was something, I had a very simple exposure to the instrument initially. Now, this guy's a profound drummer, but I was not privy to really great jazz musicians. And so my arc of kind of what I was exposed to, and therefore at those early formative years, all I focused on was feel, time and feel. I wasn't by any stretch compared to some guys. I wasn't I didn't practice a ton. You know what I mean? I like to play along with records, and just, from a very early time, I had a good clock. I remember I got to play on recordings starting when I was like 9 years old,
Okay.
And the old consoles used to have a timer on them, you know what I mean? Where when they were mixing down records, they would literally run a timer, and then that would go on the album as to the length of that track, and I would be playing and they would time me, they'd time me over like 8 bars, and I think this thing had, like a hundredths of a second divisions on it. And they would time me over 8 measures just because they were getting a kick out of it. I wasn't thinking anything about it. And 8 measures after 8 measures, it would be within a hundredth of a second to it. So for better or worse, whatever it is that drew me to that instrument, it's really based on that, some form of a clock and a feel. And then as I got exposed to other things, I wanted to be, I've always developed whatever it is I have in the form of technical things. I only reach for those things when I find a room that I want to be in, or a conversation with certain musicians. It never drove me to work on technical things until I had a reason, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A musical desire, Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the last 10 years, man, I've practiced more the last 10 years than all the previous years combined, probably times 4. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I practice a lot now, you know what I mean? Much, much more the last 10 years. But it's still just to really refine and get a deeper level of control of groove, and expression within that,
That's what it's. That's in its simplicity. That's what it's about, isn't it? Really.
Yeah. Yeah.
It should be. I was speaking last night to Simon Kirk, who his his biggest influence was Al Jackson Jr., which,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah.
there it is. It's there. You know,
Feel.
do you need any more than that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
No, man, absolutely. And he's a what a great groove drummer Simon is. You know, I mean, those things. The first time I heard it put into these words was Jim Keltner in an interview speaking about some of the drummers, and he talked about internal spacing. You know, so if you've got a measure broken up into 4 even quarter notes, it's like, well, where's the drummers 2 and 4 land relative to 1 and 3? And that internal spacing, is what the beauty of guys. And like Simon has such a great feel where he lays a backbeat. And we could talk about these things if you like, as far as what time and feel and what I love about music versus, and again, not in trying to contrast one thing as better than the other, but just in the change in trajectory of how music is made. A lot of what is done in the editing process completely removes that internal spacing. Yeah. Which essentially just completely removes any interest that I might have in it,
Yeah. Well, Pro Tools, it's anything's possible,
yeah, anything,
Is that a good thing? I don't know. Things were more simple quite a few years ago, weren't they? And
oh man, well, if you could see, I could pan around. I have 4 24-track 2-inch tape machines in my room here, right? And so to also produce and make some records and do things that way. And when I work through my process with guys, it's not like you hear it and go, well, that needs to be tightened up or whatever. It just you just have to learn the nuance of how to get that same thing with a human feel,
Do you get frustrated working with other drummers? If something's not as perhaps you do it. I know that's perhaps not the right way to look at it, but
no, it's quite all right. I mean, it's a funny thing because I'm very tired of hearing myself play. It's a strange dichotomy of, like, I guess maybe the evolution and development of over many years of playing. When you play an instrument for a lifetime, I suppose you go through different levels of. It's like a romance, you know what I mean? It's like it has its hot and cold moments, or it has its points of emphasis that change. And if I'm producing, lately, the kind of things I'm trying to do, I try to keep myself off the drums as long as possible, because I know how I perceive things, and I'm trying to look for something that is going to seem more creatively unique. Then even if somebody else might like what I do and think it's creatively unique, I already know what's coming. You know what I mean? So it's both, I've been, a bit complacent in engaging how much production I'm doing, because the nature of some of these things we're talking about technology wise, it's seemingly, to me, has stunted the amount of people because it's not just my instrument, our instrument that we're talking about where this nuance matters. It's a vocalist, it's a guitar player, it's everywhere. You know what I mean? And so to find, artists to work with that are instinctively, have developed through that way of feeling and thinking. I'm not sure where to look. You know what I mean? It's so to answer your question, working with other people, I don't do it a whole lot. I tend to, I still play on my own projects when I am working on them. There's some drummers I would love to work with, that in that role. The right circumstance, I guess, would have to come along, to give me really the means. A lot of times now people make records, there's little to no budget involved. I mean, part of what I did with my facility here was I invested, most of my resources into building something where I could try to work with artists and not have to be paying $2,000 a day to be, working. And then this hit. So I'm in a bit of a holding pattern, I guess, with some of that. But yeah, I mean, if I'm going to hire somebody, there's, I'm pretty tweaky about what I like about drums. So it's going to be a very narrow window of tolerance. It's not like I think that I know best or my way is best. But one thing I do feel like that I have a real good sense on, which is what propelled a lot of those years of sessions was the construct of a record, from a drum chair. Mm-hmm. And really, that's sort of the fundamental building block of a record, not to make more or less of one chair or the other, but it was always the old methodology was, well, we get a drum track and then everything else can conform to that. We'll fix what we have to, but we have to get a drum track,
Yeah.
And so any differences that I might have if I were working with someone else would be more based on how I perceive the record to need to be than just basic drumming things. But that being said, the times I have worked with bands or things, I'm like the easiest, guy to work with, because I'm just, I think I can make a pretty conducive environment for a drummer to be comfortable, because I know I get a really great sound in here, make it really easy for them to hear well. So they typically play, they reach their highest level, I think, sometimes when we're working together. So it's, and again, I'm way harder on myself than I am other guys, So I tend to really dig. I start digging what they're doing. Yeah, man, that's great. Don't change that. You know what I mean? I'm really about trying to, that's why I like these tape machines. I try to keep a moment. It's like the things that I obsess about, I tend to not let other guys obsess and go there,
Yeah, I get that. I understand that.
So, yeah.
It's, I mean, for me, I think it would, if I had to come and play drums in front of you, it would have the opposite effect, and I would fall apart, and it would be like, no, forget it. Just, it's set up, you do it. You know what to do, is that not...
I understand that feeling.
Yeah, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's something it's funny. I had a guy when I was first playing sessions and my career, like, there's degrees of what your demo sessions were initially, and then you get hired to play on records and whatever. And so as I was, my career was really starting to turn the corner to where I was playing on a lot of records. There was a producer in Nashville here named James Stroud, who's also a great drummer. He went back to studios in Mississippi and things. He played on some early, important 70s, R&B. Mm-hmm. And anyway, the first time I worked for him, he was co-producing with a guy I'd been working for. And I was looking forward to working with him, working for him. And I'm playing the first track and I'm looking around, I'm seeing into the control room, and I can see the producer that I know that had gotten me on the date to introduce me to this guy. And I'm looking around for the guy, right? I'm playing. And after a couple of takes, I turn to my right and he's in the room with me. He's just standing over my shoulder,
right,
watching me play. And so, thankfully I don't get, for better or worse, I've never really gotten nervous. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know what that is, but I do understand it. And when he was there, it was like, oh, whoa, okay, man. And at the same time, okay, let's back up. When I'm playing and there's a red light on, I guess it's probably because it goes back to my early development that I was given the opportunity at such a young age that's just normal for me.
Yeah. Right.
But I can totally relate. Like, to this day, if I'm just playing and another player comes in the room and I kind of get very self-conscious about playing outside the context of a known quantity. You know what I mean? If I'm practicing or if I'm doing something, I tend to, if we're jamming together, we're all in it. But if I'm just playing by myself and I feel like somebody walks in on what I'm doing, I have this strong sense still of, hey, this is a bit embarrassing. I'm just going to stop this for right now, So I understand.
I don't think you're on your own there. I really don't. Yeah. I think that's I think that's the same for probably 99.9% of musicians. Well, maybe not guitarists. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, well, it's like you're looking in on someone's, real personal space at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So are you as happy either side of the desk? Would you rather be producing? Would you rather be, is it a 50-50 thing? I have, it's funny because it'll seem a little bit hypocritical or, I tend to take issue with guys that wear too many hats, coming in, and I don't try to play other instruments, like I would never say. I took piano lessons when I was a kid. I was forced to do it and I hated it, but I did it, and
it gave me, I'm sure, some information along the way to what I developed. But once I decided I wanted to know those things, I learned it much faster. Like the 9 years of that I was forced to do. But my point in that, as far as which side of the glass I like to be on, the real deal, if you see my studio and you see that I may have a mixed credit or production credit, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, all of that was driven by just wanting to be able to be heard as a drummer the way that I wanted to be heard. So it's like, all right, if this would have all come to me and I would have hit the right circumstance where I felt like I was a part of a band or a part of some music that was giving a full, realization to the voice I was trying to put out there, I wouldn't have worn these other hats. You know what I mean? It's really, I learned how to engineer because around here, nobody could make my drums sound the way that I'm going. You don't understand. I know what should be coming through the speaker here. And so I built and learned a means to do that. You know what I mean? And then it became, well, crap, this isn't the music that's going to give voice to who I really am as a drummer. So I'm going to have to do that too. You know what I mean? I'm going to have to create through some production scenario, or, I got to create some situation that gets my voice not through some vicarious thing as a session player or a hired sideman. And I'm still trying to do that. I'm still really looking, look, you guys that, maybe have heard or have something, you still haven't heard me because I haven't done my thing yet, you know?
Yeah. So most of your sessions that you've done, I mean, gosh, is it close to 300 albums you've done? It's a really insane amount of albums, isn't it?
I don't know the count really. I mean, and other people do keep kind of track of these things, but I would say over the years that I've done it, there's so many things that don't get cataloged and done away. It's probably a lot more than that,
Yeah.
But I will say at the very same time that, you could probably take 99% of those, and I would rather nobody hear them. You know what I mean? Just because, I used to be a guy that would listen, and I'm sure we can all relate. Like, I would buy a record on an artist I didn't particularly care for if a drummer I loved was on the record.
Yeah.
I would listen for that. So that's sort of my body of work in a nutshell. You know what I mean?
Of course.
And
then I'd like to, I mean, we've talked recording, we've talked studios. I'd like to get into the live thing, because this is where I'm going to be honest, until 5-6 years ago, I somehow had not heard your name. And then all of a sudden we'll talk about when I heard your name, but there's a thing. There's a project that I think is incredible, and that's Dukes of September.
Oh yeah, man.
Now that must have been one fun gig to do.
Oh yeah, no, that was the funny thing about these things and and I had this misconception too. Is like the timeline of how these things happen is like that gig was so impactful and such an amazing moment in time for me. And it was only about 6 weeks.
Was it? Is that all it was?
That's all it was. Yeah, it was just one tour. Yeah, we made a DVD there, that's out, kind of documenting that version of it. And there was some hope that it would come back around, like there would be more of it, because it was gaining momentum I think that was maybe the second or third time they had gone out and done it. But each artist involved also had their own management and obviously their own, Steely Dan, Boz, Mike, they all have their own touring things. And I think it came down to a point of like management was more interested in continuing to, pursue their own individual touring versus this idea. But who knows, on the other side of all this, maybe they'll pull that thing back together. I would certainly love, it's like many things in life, and especially against the backdrop of what we're all dealing with now, you don't realize, as much as you're engaged in the moment trying to be there, you don't quite realize just what an opportunity and how great it was, while it's going on. And believe me, I was fully present and aware, that who I was on stage with, and getting to play with. It was really amazing.
And it's not just about the vocals either. I mean, the band, the band are stellar. They're the best.
And it was really one thing that I really enjoyed about that gig too was listening to Donald and Boz and Mike as they grew more familiar with the set list and as what deep contributors they were to the parts within those songs as they continued to take shape as we played them, you know, through more shows. It's like, man. And I think that's what was so fun about it for those guys, is they sort of got to be the side man when each other's lead singer was taking a song, you know. So now they're just doing things. I would hear Donald revoicing things on piano, or Boz developing a guitar part, or Mike doing something else on the keys. And all the entire band, like you say, was amazing. And they're always doing those things. But it was really unique to be able to experiencing, you know, those high level artists, hearing their voice just as, you know, a side musician, you know, and they were also enjoying and reaching through that process. You know?
Absolutely. And it was essentially Steely Dan's band,
exactly,
wasn't it? You know, it doesn't get much better than that, does it really? I mean, how was Freddie Washington was on it, wasn't he?
Yeah, Freddie's great, man.
That must have been a joy.
It totally was, man. And it's one of those things from the downbeat. That band is so, all of them, and Freddie included, are so diligent about the groove, you know what I mean? And about execution. It was just like, you know, everybody was, you know, hyper diligent, hyper focused, you know, and in the context of what that was, it's very reverent to the original intent of the records that we were, you know, trying to present to people in the audience. You know, it was great. Yeah. And Freddie's groove and time and tonality and musicality was great. And, you know, one thing I got a real education in funk music on the bus rides with Freddie. That's, you know, these other things that you get and experience with other musicians that fall outside of just playing. It's like my awareness of funk beyond, you know, coming from my, you know, upbringing musically, you know, the thing that I thought funk was, and R&B was a very narrow window that you got through, you know, mainstream sort of radio and different things, you know. So I got a deep lesson in funk, you know. So, you know, it was a great ride, you know.
Well, I've seen the DVD and the band, everything. It's like the ultimate, the best wedding cover band you could ever have.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll tell you, and most people, I'm sure, will go through this. Anyone that's made a taping like that, I'm sure every person on that stage, because I know we all talked about it, it was like, of all the gigs, you know, that was probably, as good as it is, that was probably, you know, one of the lesser performances. Take nothing away from what it is.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that component of, we were thrown in there very quickly. We had different monitor engineer. We had a whole different scenario to walk into. I think we did a walkthrough the day before. It might have all been one day. I just know it was like, you know, I had a couple things happen. For instance, like, drummers are going to relate to this. The basket on my snare stand, right? It was kind of failing. And so, because I had a new monitoring engineer, I'm not hearing the way I wanted to be hearing anyway, after all the shows we had done.
Yeah.
And so I'm not able to tell exactly. I know there's something going on with my snare, and I'm trying to adjust the tension on the strainer and things like this throughout. Finally get to the end of the show, and the basket had dropped, and the bottom head was literally setting against the center post of the, you know what I mean? And I was like, dang it. I mean, it still sounds okay in the recording, but it's like, just even that alone, that's a big part of what I try to bring to a show, is like a depth of sound and tone that kind of elevates things. And my snare sound, which is primary, you know what I mean, was compromised through the whole thing, but it still turned out, you know, great. People love the DVD. It's like, you know, but there's always these things going on, especially when you do a taping like that. It's just like, there's just a bit of tightening up, you know, when it's a one shot thing where you're not going to tape multiple nights and cut together. It's just sort of a little bit tight, you know,
in the moment. Yeah. I mean, monitoring is so important these days, isn't it? You know, and I'm going to just jump back to last night's interview with Simon. He was talking about playing at the Isle of Wight Festival to 600,000 in 1970 with no monitors. You know,
I can't imagine. You know what I mean? Yes.
So, you obviously, you can almost describe sound. You can tell a monitor engineer what you want cutting, boosting. Do you do that, or do you kind of?
Well, I take it a step farther. Unfortunately, I get my own split from the main mic panel, and I have my own mixer. I take and I run my own sound.
Yeah,
you know, you guys can relate. When you're playing live, for me anyway, if I'm not hearing my bass drum particularly evenly, and as being in the studio, you learn to balance yourself so that the entire kit is balanced in the overheads and balanced. Different guys will they play the bass drum lighter or whatever. But from the time I was very young, it was put into me that should be metering on the console, even kick and snare, man. You should be hitting that, moving the same sound. And if that's not right, like if I can't hear my bass drum within 30 seconds of kicking off a live show, I will waste my muscles in my leg trying to pound through it, and I'll be ruined the whole show. Like I'll make it through it, but I will have lost, because if it's like running too fast out of the gate, or I'll just expend those muscles, push them beyond their limits. So it just became it's really kind of any gig that I'm going to agree to do, they just have to get me a split because I have to run my own ears. It's just, and it was like when I'm out with a band like that, or if it was with Toto, man, I want to hear, I want a great mix. I don't want to be, you know what I mean? And it's because also I want to know what's going on, the same as I do in the studio, making adjustments to the band, trying to keep the whole thing to, in a certain groove. And that also translates out into the room. You know what I mean? Those adjustments I'm making, if I can't hear it, and I've been on gigs where half the guys aren't listening to the other half of the guys. And that becomes a real battle, because now I'm hearing everybody and I'm constantly trying to reach out and pull everyone back, hoping they're all listening at least to me,
Yeah, absolutely. It totally translates. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the T word, the Toto word. How on earth did that gig come about? I mean, you've joined an amazing lineage of drummers in that band,
Yeah, and just for what it's worth, just so that everyone knows, they're kind of on to another incarnation of the band, another scenario. So we'll be talking, just kind of in the window that I was there. That basically, I met David Hungate, who was the original bassist, in 93, early 93, which would have been, I wasn't 20 yet. I was still 19 years old, and I was playing a publishing demo, and David was on the session. And, it's one of these embarrassing moments as a kid, because, I idolized Jeff Porcaro, as a young musician.
Of course.
And so, I'm playing with David Hungate, and I just remember thinking like I couldn't, it was like a reflex mechanism. I was playing every cliche fill that I could, you know what I mean? I still played the date right. It was never going to just go off the rails like it was non-musical, because that was the beauty of Jeff's vocabulary. It was always so musical and appropriate. So you can't fuck it up too bad. You know what I mean? But it was one of those moments. But he understood, David was always been a mentor to me, and someone that has always been just through years, ahead of me in life experience, and it has such an influence on me beyond music, So he understood right away, what I had to offer as a drummer, and what he recognized or was reminiscent in some way to him. So we had this relationship ongoing for years. And then through that, David was never far out of context with Toto, they stay in touch via email or a phone call here. And he might've mentioned my name to them way before there was any wave of possibility for that to all come together. And as a result, I met Steve Lukather, not much after that, but we hung out one night in Nashville. I just took him around town and showed him some things, and we didn't play any music. There was nothing like that. We just got to know each other a little bit, had a good hang, and on our, about our business. And it was many years later. I'm trying to connect the dots here, remembering where all it happened. There was probably a little more interaction there. Obviously, no one knew that Simon was going to step away from the band or any of these things were going to happen. And then I start working with Mike McDonald on a completely different level here out of Nashville. And I'll just preface this too. Some guys may relate to this. I've never been a guy that would insinuate myself into somebody's, orbit, with some agenda laden thing. I've always been about, so when Mike moved to Nashville, right, and that's how I got to meet him, I saw all these other musicians just tripping over themselves, making idiots of themselves to try to get into his, vision, just to get into his world. And it was people, quite frankly, that I felt had no business. You know what I mean? Like I'm going, these guys, like Mike was another one of my favorite artists, And so what happened was I got to know Mike because he was in a band with my father-in-law when they were in high school, right?
Brilliant.
So just to give some insight here, I've never been one to work an angle. I've always wanted to get somewhere by only on merits alone. You know what I mean? Not because I know. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so years, but knew our drums, And so through his generosity, he had a studio here, and I had a band. I had started a band and was working on some things. And although my dad had a studio, I was living way across town, and it wasn't quite as convenient. So in one of our, get-togethers, Mike kind of found out that I was doing some things. He goes, man, yeah, you can, you can use my studio. He was so generous. I'm going to be on tour for a while. Places just sitting there, go in and set up. So I go in and I start working with my band. This is all pointing back to Toto. And I'm set up and Mike comes home early and walks through and here's what we're doing. And here he's in his studio. Here's what's coming through the monitors, digs the way it's sounding. And he asked me if I could stay set up to work on some tracks with an artist he was going to produce. Yeah. And the long and short of that was my gear was in that room for 8 years straight after that date. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so through that, Mike is managed by Vector Management, right? Vector Management is managing Boz Scaggs. So you fast forward a little bit. Boz is going to do some recording in town. He was going to re-record some of his hits so that he could have publishing control to get them used in some other avenues, commercially. And so through doing that, he put the original band, David Paich, David Hungate. He flew in Louis Shelton from Australia. Mm-hmm. And so it was really this moment where here we are, paying homage to these early Boz Scaggs recording, and it's the original band and me, in my studio with me engineering. And so, it was the opportunity to meet David in that way. Paich obviously we struck a chord, we kind of hit it off there. And then fast forward a bit longer, I start producing a record for Mike McDonald. And I'm going to come across as being down on Nashville, but I am. I spent a lot of time here. Now, the community here in Nashville has taken on a lot of people from other places in the last 5 to 10 years. But I'm talking about what was here then, the contingent of musicians here have a different spirit about them. I'm just whatever. And so I was not content to work on a record on an artist of that level. So life's ambition and be limited in the resources I could engage. So I reached out to David Paich to go out there and have him play some B3 and a few things on the record. And so now David and I have worked in that capacity where I was a producer in his studio, whatever. So we're getting a better picture of each other, and he mentioned to me at that point somewhere along there, hey, would you be interested in going out and doing some dates? I guess there was maybe some notion that Simon may not be able to make some leg of a tour for one reason or another. And then it's sort of kind of, this is a very long explanation of how it is, but I think people might be interested in just how I'm going to circle back to one thing, because this is important, I think, for anybody listening that's trying to figure out, how do I get from point A to B? You know what I mean? How do you connect these dots that seem, here I am, this kid from Easley, South Carolina, that's kind of had to come through this gospel. I mean, to give you some idea, even playing sessions in Nashville, the gospel community was sort of this outside periphery. Like it was like held against you, like to get into certain rooms. It made it even more difficult for me to get into the room with someone like David Hungate, as where I was coming from. So I was asked by Modern Drummer in 2010 to be a part of their, what is it they call? Modern Drummer Festival.
Oh yeah,
right.
Of course, yes.
And they make a DVD of this thing. At this point, I've never done a clinic. I've never spoken to a live group of, you know what I mean? I've never had to have that, if any of you guys recall the sense of having to give an oral presentation in class that I don't want to do this, that frees up, I was not comfortable with any of this. I hadn't done it, and there was some part of me that was going, it had no economic impact for me. There was no reason that I needed to do it. I was playing sessions. I had my studio, but something inside me said, man, you need to do this just because it feels this uncomfortable. You don't want to do, so you probably ought to do it. So I do it. It doesn't go the way I wanted it to. Like I had brought a band in. I had taken the money that I was making to do the thing, and I paid other musicians to go up and play with me. We composed some things that we were going to play, and the scope of my contribution to that thing was supposed to be more about the rhythm section presentation. Yes. I get into Q&A because it's the first time I've done one of these things, and I run out of time. You know what I mean? But fast forward, when Boz is wanting to get me into the band with Donald Fagan with the Dukes of September, as I understand it, he mentioned my name to Donald, and Donald, is going to do some checking around on the internet, see if he can find something. And what pops up, the only thing that's there on me is this Modern Drummer Festival. Otherwise, there would have been nothing. The only things that would have been there would have been country records I had played on that would have no context.
Yes. And
it just so happens one of the key things I did on that video was I talk about a halftime shuffle, because that's one of my favorite things. And I talk about Bernard Purdie and Steely Dan and Jeff Porcaro. So, I would just say to guys that are trying to figure out how on earth can I make these connections that seem impossible to make, it's like, you do the uncomfortable thing. You just do the next thing that you can do. There's really no way that you can go knock on someone's door. It's always working toward an end. And so that whole thing got me tighter in with Boz. It got me in with David. It got me in with Toto. It's all, in some form or fashion, you can go back and look at this one moment. I did something I did not want to do, seemingly had no, I've never been a clinician. You know what I mean? That's never been part of my thing. It didn't have to be. I was playing sessions. So there was no incentive really. And it was very uncomfortable, but it grew into things much larger. So, and all of that to say, then there's a vacancy with Toto. First time around, I go out, Keith Carlick, which was a strange thing because Keith and I were caught in this sort of very tight orbit where he's with Donald, he's out on another tour. I go out with, the Dukes of September. So, and then Toto's reforming and Keith's there. And you know what I mean? It was just this very, kind of undulating parts shifting around and nothing quite landing. And then I get called back in 2015. And then Keith kind of just recommits to Steely Dan. And then, every year I was there, was essentially getting asked, hey, you're going to be back with Toto each year. It's like, I was always just sort of a hired on guy. It just kept adding. And the other thing I'll add to that for anyone out there, if you're not a part of a band, if I'm not a part of a specific artist, I always felt like 5 years with someone was a pretty good run, and if you go much beyond that, people start to assume that you're unavailable. You know what I mean? And so even with Toto, I might have let it slip up on me a little bit, the assumption that it was something that was going to continue. And I didn't follow my own, because there's other calls that come along during the course of things. And there are other incentives like, just the opportunity to play with Lenny Castro, you know what I mean? Was like, it was worth turning down some other opportunities because I wanted to get as much of that as I could, you know.
Yes, of course.
But I would just say, you know, if you're in one camp for very long, as a way to manage a long-term career, you have to be mindful of making sure people understand that you have availability beyond just what they perceive it to be, you know? So,
I mean, you're joining a band with a back catalogue of just incredible songs.
Yeah.
Mainly incredible. There's some, I'm a Toto fan, by the way. And I have to say, Keith Carlock is the best fit ever for Steely Dan, ever, I think. Best fit for Toto? You don't have to say anything, but not for me personally. Simon was great. Again, he kind of coloured the music a little bit, I think is the best way I could describe it. But you seem the closest thing to Porcaro that they've had since. You've probably heard that before.
Well, you know, it's a double-edged sword there, because some people like to make, number one, those words have never passed my lips, right? You know, any sort of, right? There's such a deep reverence there. Some people like to use, so I'll hear it because you can't help it. And this would help people out there too, man. The nature of social media, it's like you can't avoid seeing what other people say. You can be as passively involved with it, and it's still going to make its way to you, even if you're trying not to pay attention. And there's like this double-edged sword, like, you know, they're on one hand, deep reverence. It's like, well, he just tries to sound like this. And well, I never said that. Everybody else says that. You know what I mean? It's like, but when you say just, isn't that kind of taking a shot at Jeff at the same time? If it's that fucking easy, can't anybody just fucking step in there and do it? So it's like, what the fuck do you mean by this? So, you know, that stuff got a little bit tenuous. You know, I was kind of in a situation where you just can't win.
Yeah, of course.
But for me, right, it's always the music is first. And I think of things in terms of, if I'm out there in the audience hearing the band that I showed up to play, I want to hear some reverence to what made me love the band.
Exactly.
I also understand you got to get your own identity in there. You know what I mean? And I think I found a way. If you really have discerning ears, you can certainly hear a difference in what I brought versus the original thing. I wish I could play exactly like Jeff, right? If you just snap your fingers. I mean, I'm sure there's everyone at some point in time would look at their mentor and influence and go, yeah, I'm not as good as that. I wish I could play like, you know what I mean? But at the same time, no, I don't mean that. We all want to be heard individually. That's the biggest thing that keeps you going. It's like, I want my voice to be heard, but my voice in a situation where I'm hired on is like, I'm looking at the band and I'm going, what's the best for the band? You know, I'm a part of this entity here. So I'm not, I can hear the chatter and, he's just doing this or he's playing like that or whatever. Go, man, I don't care. I'm going to play the music the right way. I don't need to prove myself to you to alienate 98% of the audience. You know what I'm saying? Right now, what I'm doing is trying to reestablish what I loved about the band in the closest way I can. And that would be the same in any situation I'm hired into. When I'm playing Peg with Donald, you know what I mean? It's like, to me, there's a very specific reason that song feels the way it does, and it's Rick Marotta's part on the original record. I hear some guys go in there and play that, and they play on the bass drum the keyboard part, which is those dotted eighth notes. But Ricky's original part, he's playing, basically the bass drums on the dotted quarter at the end of the bar. There's downbeat, there's like it's a half note, tied to an eighth, and then a dotted quarter, right? And that's all the bass drum is doing through that whole song. Boom, got, doom, got, gung, gung. Well, it's a quarter note and then another eighth, right? But it's not going boom, ba, boom, boom, ba, boom. It's like, if you don't understand the nuance, and I just feel like when an audience shows up to hear that, they love that original representation of the tune. Unless we're rearranging it, we're re-envisioning it. I'm trying to give it the best of what its original intent was, and if somebody wants to view it as like, there's this strange thing amongst jazz musicians, right? And that sounds pretty heavy handed. It's not. I totally understand. who are you? What's your voice? Don't sound like anybody else. Absolutely. I don't want to I'd be thought that I'm sounding like anyone else, but it's also not a jazz gig. You know what I'm saying? This is not what's happening. When you show up for a rock show, you want to be visceral. You want to be communicating a moment, but at the same time, you want to be giving the audience what they came to hear.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been massively frustrated at times when I go to see something, you know, and it's like, well, that was my favorite tune. And you butchered it, you know what I mean? Just because you wanted to shit on the original thing, you know what I mean? So anyway, that's a bit of my take on that.
It felt, well, I'm lucky enough to have seen you. I saw you at Manchester Apollo.
Okay.
And it was a great gig. And it felt, how can I put this? It felt really comfortable, like you'd always been there, do you know? And I've seen them with Simon as well. I've not seen them with Keith. I've seen them obviously on YouTube and what have you, but yeah, it just felt comfortable. The spirit of Porcaro. I know you're not, you know. Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. But believe me, I'm not. Yeah, it sounds like I'm sensitive about that. I'm not. When I touch on it like that, all of us are put in that position where you're coming in behind someone else. I just want to put it in context that for anyone out there, the first thing you need to do if you really want to respect the gig and get the respect of the artist is treat the music with reverence. You know, and then find the nuance in there where you can make it your own, you know?
Of course. Did you, I mean, 5 years, as I said, is a long time, you know, when you've been sideman for, well, you are a sideman, you know, I don't mean any disrespect with that. That's what you do. Did you enjoy the gig? Was it a fun gig? Were the guys cool and everything? Was it?
Oh yeah. I mean, we had great times. The thing that I'll tell guys some insight into with any artist, and there was a version of this with Dukes of September. Toto in particular, it's a super intense bunch of guys, right? When you think about kind of what they formed and forged a band, like some bands stake out their identity on, you know, like this lead singer frontman that embodies something that speaks to people, engages them on a human level, and they come out to see Bono. You know what I mean? And U2's a great band, and I love all the guys, Larry, all the, you know what I mean? These are great musicians, but that's a band that has an image of political and social messaging, and you know what I mean? There's all of these things, Rolling Stones, other things. When you get a band like Toto that's really fully centered on musicianship, right? And arrangement and the ability to pull off all that stuff to the record in a live thing. That's what makes them unique. And it's the strength of the band that maybe makes up for the missing identity of some lyrical thread that's always making some statement or what, you know what I mean? It's take nothing away from their compositions. You know what I'm saying? But that band is like a rock band that really is getting away with almost being an instrumental band. You know what I mean? Like that's the emphasis to people. It's so much about the nuance and the parts and the arrangements of these records. And so what drives a band like that to be able to take those things with kind of this missing component for other bands, you know what I mean? Of this sort of public image, if you will, you know, that's very identifiable. It's about an intense commitment to being heard. You know what I mean? Like being heard in the way that they were originally meant. And then you have components of the band that does, you know, Lukather taking solos, David Page soloing, or X or whomever. You know, there's moments within the set where they really do get licensed to go, hey, check out what else we've got. And their audience appreciates that. And the thing is, the audience was building. That was what's sort of bittersweet about what happened when all the legal things happened and then COVID. The band was on such a trajectory, you know, at that time. But yeah, we had great times. And I just say that, you know, the expectation that when you have that many guys that are that intense about things, it gets heavy, man. It's like that intensity is not just musical. It's like, man, how funny can you be? You know, if you're picking dinner tonight, it better be a fucking great restaurant if you're going to put your name in the pot that says, you know what I mean? Like there's just this, and I'm that way. Yeah. I've been accused of being super intense. So one of the guys inside the band and they all kind of agreed to this, was like every time a leg of the tour ended, it was just in time. Like, you know, like basically coexisting and that combustible, high intensity nature, even when we're all having a great time, and really we had a great time. We made the best of everything there, and the guys were just great. But that level of intense personalities, which means the guys are going to be highly opinionated, highly sensitive, you know, highly, capable of having mood swings. You know what I mean? It's just going to be all these things that the more time you hold that inside this little, you know, rolling submarine, if you will, you know what I mean? It's just time to decompress. And it was always right at the end of the tour. And I think some of that was just about everybody understood if it was a 6-week tour, a 9-week tour, whatever, you're just kind of laying, you kind of pacing yourself all the way to the end, your patience for certain things, even, and I think this is probably true for touring for everyone. You know what I mean? The best of the circumstances start to become a grind toward the end. You know what I mean? But it was never a grind hitting stage. You know what I mean? And I'm sure every band will tell you that too. It's like, you know, you get through all that crap and then you walk on stage as soon as everybody's playing. Especially with those guys, man, there was such, I feel like the guys still felt like they had something to prove. Yeah. You know what I mean? Every night, because they'd always been treated a bit offhandedly by critics and whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's why I enjoyed playing with them so much, is because there was still a component of, you hadn't heard the best of me yet.
Still hungry.
I mean, yeah. So
I guess you're going to look back with fond memories of this, and you're going to go, yeah, glad to be a part of that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I mean, life just in general, we're about the same age. You can probably relate. Anybody else checking this out can relate. It's like one thing that I've been short-sighted on is like this misguided notion that, you know, like certain things are going to change and they're not up to you. You know what I mean? Yeah. Whether it's, you know, my children growing up and moving on, and you know what I mean? Like there's just certain things. And I'm trying to look at that situation and just go, hey man, it happened. It was great. Because right now, who knows, man? Yeah, I believe we're all going to be touring and out there again, but it's of no value to my psyche right now, because it's as much an unknown as anything. Mm-hmm. And really everything's always unknown in that regard. But yeah, I mean, I see Lenny and I became Lenny Castro. We're just the deepest of friends. And he and I talk literally every day. You know, we get at FaceTime, we'll have coffee together, whatever, you know, then we might miss a day or two here, something starts happening, but we're always in contact. And of course, the idea that we may not be on a gig together playing again is I just believe there's a way that that's going to happen. You know, I don't know what the context is going to be. You know, I think those kind of things you just, you know, kind of will into being, you know what I mean? But yeah, there's, I'm still, you know, friends with the guys. We still talk fairly regularly. You know, I'm creatively still involved with David Page, and you know what I mean. Like Steve Burcar and I are still, you know, it's just, you know, it was just a chapter, and I'm trying. It's the first time in my life really where I've had to go, well, okay, that happened, and you got to do that. Now what's next? And also to allow for that, man. You know, rather than trying to hold on to something. You know, there might be something even better if you just open yourself up to it. You know?
Absolutely. Well, look, Shannon, this has been a fascinating hour, and I really mean that. It really
great,
has.
Man.
So
I appreciate
it. Thank you so much for doing it, and let's hope you get back out touring soon, and hopefully get to see you in the UK again. So
beautiful, man. Thank you for having me, and best to you and everyone checking this out, and hope to see you back out there, you know, sooner than later.
Let's hope so. Thanks again, Shannon. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.